Hey there, welcome to Inside the Creative Mind. And I'm your host, William Saunders. And today I'm going to do something a little different. Long story short, I've got a guest I've been trying to get on this show for a while now. And for one reason or another, it just keeps getting postponed. But I really want you guys to be able to see what she's got going on right now. And I really want to get that episode in the books. So I'm going to do this as just a fill piece, and then hopefully next week we can get back at it. So that's my hope and wish for that. But I found this to be something that I really want to share with you guys. So if you are a visual artist or if you're a poet, then I'm sorry, but this is going to be a little bit of not for you. This is really aimed for either the musical artists, musicians that I know out there that are aspiring to make a career of this, or if you know a musician or you know a musical artist that's trying to make it, please share this with them. And if you're just starting off and you're brand new to music and you're wanting to make that jump and thinking about having a career in music, this is definitely something for you to take into consideration. So here recently, this week, a friend of mine, Chris Bruders, he has a music panel and they'll get together and talk about various different subjects. And he asked me to be on this panel for this prior week. And the subject was streaming and the damage it's done to the music industry. And before I go into depth about some of the questions that he sent me and what my answers are for that, I wanted to talk a little bit about just the industry in general, and then kind of frame the streaming piece on top of this, because this one portion is probably really important to at least acknowledge at the outset. So let's turn back the clock to 1960. In the 60s, you had a much lower number of musical acts that were competing for what was then a pretty big piece of the pie. And then you work that way, through the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And by the 90s, this just exploded. Even with the 80s, it's really kind of exploded, but nowhere near as much as the 1990s into the 2000s. Then it just really just kind of, if I was looking at a chart, it might look like this, and just skyrocket for the amount of people that are out there. But the market penetration compared to what the market availability is, that's a little different. That might be hard to be seen again. So there is just so many artists out there. There's so many people competing to try to get the attention span of the listener. So I wanted to put that out there just to start with, is that when you add streaming as the consumption method on top of that, it does make things a little bit more understandable about why it is more in the state it's in right now. Okay. So the first question Chris had on this was, if streaming pays fractions of a cent, is it still a platform for discovery, or has it simply become part of the business plan for tech giants that is built on the backs of free labor? Yes. Yes to both of those. And what I'll say about this is it is still a mechanism for discovery. But I think if you're banking on it being your primary method of discovery, I think you're missing the boat. I think performance is still the number one way to sell yourself. People can see you, they can meet you, you can form a relationship. And at the end of the day, it is about owning that relationship with that fan is the most important thing that you could ever think about doing. Okay, so let's get that out of the way first. But I would liken the marriage with, or the being part of streaming is like, it's like dancing with a creep that has bad intentions. Yeah, it's creepy, and yeah, you want to get you want to minimize your time that you're doing it, but it may be part of just the game. It may be part of convenience. And that's what this really boils down to. Streaming is convenient. I know, and I can only speak from my own experience, but and I'm actually a little embarrassed to tell you this. When I car shop, I specifically will purchase my vehicle specifically because it has Apple CarPlay. Because what I want to be able to do is push the little button and say, play K-Flay Giver on Apple Music or YouTube Music or whatever, whichever one I'm listening to. And that's what I'm in the mood for. I don't have to pull over so I can, look it up and play it. I don't have to sit there and listen to some random thing I don't want to really listen to. I can just do that. And then, of course, it will feed in like songs or stuff that it knows I like thereafter. But it allows me to quickly access the song I want to listen to in that moment for whatever it is I'm in the mood for. And that is of immense value for me. Like I said, this last time I had to, after my car got stolen out of the parking lot of the Warwick Theater, and I had to get another one. It was a big piece of my decision making for what I eventually ended up buying, though. So, yeah. So just to wrap this particular question up, yeah, it is, and it is part of the discovery process. But like I said, it's not the primary one. You want to have it out there for convenience, so that if somebody wants to listen to you and they search for you on Spotify or whatever they get their music from, you're available. So that's my advice with that. The second question was, how has the Spotify skip button fundamentally corrupted the way songs are written? Are we sacrificing the spark just to make sure we hit the chorus in the first 30 seconds for a payout? And I got to tell you, on this one, I don't think the skip button necessarily has ruined everything, because I skip songs all the time that I'm just not in the mood for at that time. But it doesn't. They're still in my playlist. There's still going to be. And when I say playlist, this isn't actually one I curate. This is one that, because I like certain songs, and it creates YouTube Music will create what is called a super mix or something like that. And I just click on that, and I'm bound to hear stuff I generally like and stuff that I've recently discovered. And I'll give it to YouTube Music. It has presented me with a lot of music I was unaware of that I just absolutely love. So it has played a good role in that. Lord Huron, I never heard them before I actually started listening to them, and now they're one of my favorite bands. So there is some value there. So anyway, yes, the problem is attention span, right? And I do see that becoming, worse and worse and worse and worse. But I do think there's a light at the end of the tunnel with this. I do blame social media and the doom scrolling for a large portion of this, And yes, there are certain genres, like I would say modern country or pop. Yeah, you probably do want to get to the chorus sooner than later. But for the music that I'm into, I'm more interested in interesting, unique chordal arrangements, unique instrumentation. Something that strikes me as interesting is going to be far more attractive for me to prolongly listen than simply having the hook, right up front. I don't really care about that. I eventually, once you get to it, but I can't tell you how many songs I've checked out simply because it was just different. It was just different or interesting, and a lot of it I really, really like. So that's my experience with that. But I mean, I could be unique in that fashion. And the other thing I'll say about this is that this is not new. This is not something that's really, really new, in the fact that, radio stations in the 60s were making some of the same kind of stipulations for what they were wanting to get in from artists. They wanted that hook and that chorus, right there up front. And of course, the 70s with album rock and everything else kind of was a backlash to that. So, and honestly, that's kind of what I see coming here. I kind of see that there will be this pushback for longer form music. I can see 6-minute songs coming back. I can see albums coming back. The vinyl resurgence is always going to be what it is. Some people just collect; they don't even listen to them. So it's kind of a in that space. But I do not overly worry about the skip function on Spotify or any of the other streaming platforms. The third question: playlists are the new radio. Is getting on a playlist the only way to survive a rigged system? I think you have to be out there from a convenience standpoint, convenience of the listener. And I will say that for all practical purposes, the role of program director has been replaced by algorithms. And yes, you do want to be algorithm friendly, but it's only if streaming is way high up in your business plan for how your discovery is going to work. Again, I would argue with you. If you're making it number one, I think you're really messing up. I think that is not the best strategy at all. I think performance is still number one. However, you can get into just show your craft off to an audience. And, you find out, and the other benefit of live performance too, is you find out very quickly what works and what doesn't. The process of finding out what works and what doesn't, when you're relying on streaming and you're chasing, your statistics all the time to find out how many people watch, listen to this one as opposed to this one. I'm just telling you, you may find a lot of false data in that. If it's depending on the day of the week, the mood, the climate in a society, there's so many things that could go on that can influence why one song that may get more listens to or more views or whatever it is than other ones. But when you are performing repeatedly in front of an audience, you learn real fast what's popular and what's not, and what works and what doesn't. And it allows you to actually refine your songs and polish them in such a way that they become, in other words, like I've got songs that specifically I wrote for the Wall Talkers that when we perform them at the outset, or the original recordings I had of them, are nowhere near as good as what some of the live recordings were later on before, I kind of had to walk away. And if I was to go back and record them now, they would be much better. The recordings would be much better because of all the little subtleties that I was able to refine through live performance and what I learned through live performance. And audience reaction to those songs has made those songs better than they were originally when I wrote them and recorded them. So there's that to think about. And what else should I say about this? Streaming is just one way to find fans, as I've said. The other thing I would say that I would compare this to is donors. If you want to understand how you grow your fan base, I would liken it, if you know anything about how nonprofit organizations manage donor relationships, like, you really want to grow your donor base. If they like you, you can assume a certain kind of donation. If they love you, you can kind of assume that they're going to commit this much money to supporting you. And if they really, really love you, you can kind of expect maybe a little bit more than that. So it becomes a little bit more predictable. And you really have to own the relationship to move people through that cycle of just, not knowing who you are, becoming familiar with you, into being an avid fan. You got to kind of, you own it. It's through communication and asking things and listening. All those things add up to how you massage that and kind of mature your fan base. And at the end of the day, that's going to be one of the most important things for you is to grow your fan base organically as much as possible. But don't forget the convenience of what streaming is, okay? 4, corporate labels now look at TikTok metrics before they look at talent. At what point does an artist stop being a creator and start being a content generator for a data company? That's a good question. And it's tricky. And yes, unfortunately, some of the labels will look at data with the same value as they do talent. Is it right? Probably not, but unfortunately, it just is what it is. So if you're going to play that game, then you have to be fully prepared to play that game. And unfortunately, I will tell you this, that I do think that, if I was 19 years old and was just hell bent on becoming a musician today, I would try to do my best to win over some fans that have a talent. I would put a call out there to say, who's good at social media that can give me some volunteer time to, help me with this. Because I really believe it takes a team. I think you do have to feed the social media machine if you want to grow your fan base through that, and use that as a mechanism for curating them and growing them and owning that relationship with them that way. I would tell you that captive is better than shared platforms type stuff. So your own website, your own email list, all that stuff is far better. Drive them ultimately to where you own the relationship at is the best strategy for the ultimate destination. But that doesn't mean that streaming isn't part of that, and it doesn't mean that social media isn't part of that. There are just other tools in your toolbox to try to help. Think of it as a big funnel. Everybody's up here. You first want to be heard, and that being heard can be by live performance, or it can be through, streaming. And if somebody hears you, there's going to be a percentage that like it, and there's going to be a percentage of people that it's just not their thing, and that's okay. You don't need to get them any further down the funnel. And then of all those people that are aware of you, you're going to have this many that like you, and of this many that like you, you're going to have this many that love you, and then you probably have this many that really, really, really love you. And it's just numbers, So if you have 100,000, if you have 100 people, and that equates to 5 people liking you, then 1,000, would be 50. Then you could just expand it out and to whatever, however that translates, So the more people you can get into that funnel, the better. And the same thing works with donors too, as well. So, and what else? I would look at streaming as being a kind of a testing ground. I think that's a good way to frame it too. You can test out, who you're getting associated with. A lot of times, if you see yourself, as part of a playlist, you can ask friends and stuff like that to ask them to play, like if you got Apple CarPlay or something like that, play so-and-so on Spotify, and then pay very close attention who they put you in with is another way to kind of test and see, who are you being compared with, and where they, putting you in with. If they're putting you in with people that you've never heard of before, well, yeah, you're not moving the algorithm is what it boils down to. 5, in an ecosystem that demands a new single every 4 weeks to stay relevant in the algorithm, is the long form album a dying art form, or a luxury for that only the rich can afford? Well, I think it depends on how the consumer wants to consume, first and foremost. And like I said, album sales, as far as, albums as general, I mean, there are people just collect them because they like the cover art, it's so it can be just a commodity that's not necessarily the go-to for playback and listening. But I do think that there will be a pendulum swing on this. I do think that at some point, content and quality and something that isn't just a 2-minute bubblegum thing will reemerge, and that long form music will matter again. I think it matters. I think we're starved for something that I can put on and just listen to, without having to hit that skip button. So one of the greatest things I think is, as an accomplishment, is to be able to put an album's worth of music together that flows beautifully, and that every song on that side or the whole thing is something that you can listen to in its entirety. That's a very much a dying art form, and it doesn't mean it can't be done, but my favorite albums are the ones I can listen to either 80% of it without skipping tracks, or the whole thing, period. It just, they are, I think it will matter again. And that's not me being an old fuddy either. Okay, last question was, if every artist pulled their music off of major streaming platforms tomorrow, would the industry collapse, or have we already handed over the keys to the kingdom for too little in return? Whew. I don't think so. I mean, I think we've seen like some artists, pull their music off of Spotify in protest and stuff like that. And they're still there. Neil Young, probably one of the top 100 artists of all time, somewhere between 750 million streams a year to 1.4 billion streams a year. An artist like that didn't make it really that much of a dent. So I don't think, collectively, if a whole bunch of us that are getting, hundreds of hundreds of listens and thousands of listens, I don't think that's gonna put much of a dent in it. And again, is it that streaming itself is bad, or is it the compensation, or is it that when I look at convenience, which again, this is what I totally believe this is, 7-Eleven, Quick Trip, Casey's, wherever you're at, wherever the little convenience store you have, wherever you're at, they didn't replace fancy sit-down restaurants. And some of it's, I mean, I know, realize this is probably a bad analogy, but one's for convenience and the other one's for quality. What we are going to see at some point is a pushback on the convenience for quality. I think I'm already seeing it somewhat with some of the AI stuff. We desire, I don't want it to be fake, I want it to be real, kind of thing. And I think some of it will be the same with this, is that I want to listen to who I want to listen to, and I don't necessarily want you to give me a bunch of fill, and I want to go back to something I have a little bit more control over. And I think live music will also make a strong comeback. Not that I think it's very much alive in a lot of scenes, and it depends on the genre. It depends upon, the economic situation at the time. I think right now everybody's hurting a little bit for, discretionary money to spend on stuff like that. But I know for me, I've had to, just because of, I had, when I got laid off, I had to, cut back on a number of TV, or platforms, Sling and HBO and Netflix and Prime, and then all these Paramount and all these other ones. I have to, say, okay, what do I really need? And surprisingly enough, what I really need isn't a whole lot of that. but I want to watch what I want to watch. The same thing with music. I want to listen to what I want to listen to. So let's get to some bottom lines on this. Streaming did not break the music industry. I don't think so. What it did was it unmasked it for what it really is. And what it really is a system where access is abundant, attention is scarce, and value flows solely from whoever controls discovery. And that's why you don't want it to be your sole mechanism for discovery. I just think you are missing the boat if you do that. So own the relationship. Get yourself a plan. If you don't have a strategic plan for this upcoming year, I would really encourage you to. I've got videos on the channel for how to build one, and I'll certainly help you if you run into a brick wall. But understand what your plan is for discovery and how to build your fan base and where you're going to drive them. So that's my advice for all that. So I hope you got something from this. Again, yeah, it is a kind of a, streaming is a little bit of a bastard, but it's just it's a bastard of a tool that is solely there for convenience. All right. So I hope you have a wonderful day and keep making good things. Be creative today. Okay. See you around.